I'm a bit sick tonight. I won't be writing. Don't think I can get into the creative stream, so don't worry if you can't write sometimes when you've planned to. Dark fantasy. Dark fantasy, I suppose, would be the genre best fitting my story once printed. I know that is broad for now. Similar to what I mostly read. I mostly read airy short stories, perhaps supernatural, not horror per se, and not modern. Lots of mythologies and legends of the world. I don't think I've read 20 modern novels in the past 20 years. I just don't have the time. So my story that I'm writing probably doesn't follow a structure familiar to modern novels, though I wouldn't know. This is kind of what I'm reading at the moment. See, these are all good short stories, and I love poetry. In particular, types of poetry. Simply, I'm making videos to self-promote my story before it's finished and goes to print. I hope to finish the complete story this year. Sections of it are on second and third drafts, so that would set final draft and print for the end of 2027, hopefully. The story spans 4 sections, 4 chapters in total. It starts as a journey of adolescence and turns into a quest. It has a backbone rooted in biblical prophecy. The first and final chapters are set in the future. Second and third chapters are set in our present. Half of me wants to complete it, and half of me wants to never end, as I've enjoyed writing the whole story. It's a therapy, but to finally tie both ends together, it would be like a proof of the blessing, I guess. I started writing the story in 2010. If you believe that. My life has changed innumerably since. 16 years. It goes quick. After you turn 20, 16 years can go quick. And lots occurs. But I'm a very slow writer and reader, which is probably why I stick to short stories. Yeah, I've written for my own enjoyment and catharsis. So the story it's not engineered for any particular person or genre, except probably a person somewhat like myself. So a little bit about me. As a kid, my nan and great nana, they always talked about fairies and witches on their farm and in their bushes. My nan would always say there was a spell book on her land buried from a witch that used to live on her land before she did. Yeah, she would always talk about how she was descendant of Vikings, and my great nana, she would always take us hunting for fairies in her raspberry bushes and around her chickens, and always tell us you gotta look in between and you'll see them. You just gotta be quiet. She was more Irish. When I became a teenager, so I became a teenager, went through puberty, when Eminem brought out that album. So in my adolescence, I thought of myself as a gangster. I haven't listened to him for 20 years, and I hear he's still angry, so... But really, I would have easily been a goth, I reckon, if a few years older. Or better still, an emo, if a few years younger. I was brought up Christian, left home at 16, went my way for a few decades, wanted to be a hippie, took a heap of psychedelics, trying to find spirituality through experience, read into Gnosticism, Buddhism, Hinduism, bits of most other religions, and I touched on a lot of occult teachings, just reading what was out there. Even got into reading into evolution. That never sat with me. I always see design in nature, intelligent design. Eventually, I came full circle to my Christian roots, and that's in about 2010 when I started writing this book. But the book has a lot of the darkness that was from my wandering that I had to purge. I'll go into more details in a future video. You can ask any questions, I'll answer all of them. But if you like dark fantasy or prophetic haunting stories with biblical undercurrents, then check here to see the progress. It will be a standalone book, 70,000 words, so not a rambling, never-ending story. It was never a dream of mine to write a book. I never imagined I would write a book. My dream was to go into the Amazon rainforest. I thought everybody wanted to go into the Amazon rainforest, and I did that. But I've always written. My whole life I've written down my thoughts and ideas, and this story that I've been writing, it grew in my daydreams over years of boredom, working in a factory on a conveyor belt, mindless work. And this world and these events, the story just grew in my brain, and it was all complete and connected that I had to start writing it down. It was just coming all out of me. So that's what I've been aiming towards. I reckon I'll read one of these folk tales. The Lost Islands. Hundreds of years ago, the little people lived all over Britain. Now, after many invasions and with the noise of modern life, the little people have retreated to live in the lonely places of Wales and Scotland and far Cornwall. They are secretive and keep themselves to themselves. But some of the old Celtic folk who have the power of second sight can see them. The little people dress in green, except for their hats, which are red. It does not do to offend them, for they have magic powers. Most people think it wise to stay right away from the little people, or fairy folk, as they are sometimes called. However, one Welshman found great benefit from mixing with the fairies. His name was Griffith, and he lived at port called Milford Haven Many years ago, fine markets were held at Milford Haven. The country folk for miles around would bring their goods to sell. The little people came to the market too. They never spoke, but if they wanted to buy any article, they would put down money at its side. Then, if the storeholder thought the price was fair, he would pick the money up. The fairies would then take the goods and go. If the price was not enough, the storeholder would leave the money lying until more was added to it, or until the fairies took up the money and left without buying anything. The fairies who went to Milford Haven were honest, never stole, and the local people were glad to trade with them. Very few people could see the fairies. Most traders merely saw the money appearing on their stalls and the goods going. However, Griffith, a corn merchant, could always see the little people, and so could a butcher who lived in the centre of town. Griffith and the butcher sold much corn and meat to the fairy customers. "There must be plenty of them to need all those supplies," Griffith would say to the butcher. "Indeed," would be the reply. "And where do they live?" I ask myself. "It is not in the valleys near here. I see no sign of them on my walks with my dog. Either they must be very lazy, that they grow no food for themselves, or they must live somewhere where there is no room to farm." Everyone puzzled about where the fairy folk lived, but no one knew. Then one day, Griffith was walking high up by St. David's churchyard, when he happened to glance out to sea and saw some islands where he had never seen islands before. Having inherited the second sight from his mother, Griffith knew that these were the green isles of the ocean, the lost islands of long ago. "If the islands are in the mood to show themselves, then I will go to look at them," he thought. He started down towards the seashore, but at once the islands disappeared. He walked back up to St. David's churchyard, and again he could see the islands. Griffith understood at once what was happening. "I can see the islands only when I am standing on sacred land," he muttered. A lesser man would have stayed in the churchyard and admired the islands from there, but Griffith was clever. He cut the piece of turf on which he was standing and carried it down to his boat. Then he stood on the turf in the boat and looked seawards. He saw the islands clear and bright, standing on the turf all the way. Griffith stared towards the islands and landed on the largest. At once he met some of the fairy folk, who brought him corn from him. They greeted him in surprise and laughed when they learned how he had found his way to their home. Then they showed him the beauties of their little islands. "Many islands have disappeared beneath the waves," they said, "but some have become invisible by magic, and it is on these islands that we live, safe from you big trampling mortals." Then they sent Griffith home with his arms full of gifts, and they continued to trade with him for many years and made him a rich man. However, the fairies made Griffith give them the sacred turf which had guided him to the islands, and no matter how often he stood in St. David's churchyard staring out to sea, he never saw the islands again.